The static came first, a low, grainy hiss that filled the room like a whispering draft, as though the night itself was trying to crawl inside. Mark Winters turned the dial slowly, the tiny red needle of his old tabletop radio quivering across forgotten frequencies. He wasn't sure why he kept the antique in the first place. It belonged to his grandfather, who had passed years ago, a relic from another time, too heavy and stubborn to ever be useful again. But tonight, Mark was restless, and the radio seemed like a harmless distraction. He twisted the knob, cycling through dead air, static, and the occasional fragment of late-night talk shows. Then, faintly, almost buried in the fuzz, music. Mark froze. It wasn't a song he recognized. Not a pop station, not old rock, not even classical. This was something stranger, softer, like a lullaby played underwater. The melody was deliberate, but the instruments, if they were instruments at all, sounded warped, stretched, distorted. And beneath it, almost hidden in the layers of static, came the sound of a voice. It wasn't singing. Not really. The voice carried no words, only hums that rose and fell in patterns too intricate to be accidental. Mark leaned closer, his ear nearly pressed to the speaker. The radio hummed with life, vibrating faintly against the wood of his desk. For a moment, he thought he could make out a phrase, actual words buried in the sound. Something about the cold, about being seen, about waiting. Then the music stopped. Dead silence. The sudden absence of sound felt heavier than the static before. Mark pulled back, uneasy. He checked the time. 12:14 a.m. exactly. He hadn't noticed the minutes slip away while listening. He reached for his phone, instinctively opening a search window. No results. No station broadcasting at that frequency. No local late-night program matching what he'd just heard. Nothing. He sat back in his chair, staring at the silent radio. And then it started again. The same frequency. The same strange melody. But this time, the voice was clearer. Mark's hand hovered over the power switch. He should have turned it off. He should have walked away. But something in the sound held him, pulling him deeper into the hum. He leaned in again, straining to catch the words. "I see you." Mark jerked back, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. The voice had been direct, crisp, spoken not as part of the melody, not in echo or distortion, but like someone leaning into a microphone, addressing him. He slammed the power button. The room went dark and quiet. His own breathing was the only sound left, harsh and uneven. After a long moment, he laughed nervously to himself. He must have misheard. It had to be his imagination, fueled by late-night fatigue and the eerie nature of the signal. Just a fragment of some forgotten broadcast bouncing across the airwaves. He stood, stretched, and switched off the desk lamp. But as he turned toward his bedroom, something caught his eye. In the reflection of the darkened window, the radio's dial was still glowing. The machine wasn't off. Mark walked back slowly, every step heavy, deliberate. He pressed the button again. The light didn't flicker. The music swelled back to life. The sound drifted back, smooth and unbroken, as though it had never stopped playing. The warped lullaby filled the room again, weaving between the faint hiss of static like something alive, curling into every corner. Mark's fingers trembled above the power switch. He pressed it once, then twice, harder this time, but the radio didn't respond. The glow from the dial seemed stronger, as if the little antique machine were feeding on his attention. The voice returned, not humming, not singing, speaking. "You can hear us now." Mark's throat tightened. The words were calm, almost soothing, but they carried the cold weight of certainty. He tried to rationalize. Maybe it was an old recording. Maybe some pirate station was having fun creeping out insomniacs who wandered across their signal. It had to be a trick. But then the voice said his name. "Mark!" The air left his lungs. He stumbled backward, his heel catching on the rug. The chair toppled behind him, clattering against the floor, but the voice didn't pause. "Do not be afraid." Mark wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't move. The sound pinned him in place. His mind screamed that none of this made sense. Radios didn't just know your name. He didn't believe in ghosts, in spirits, in messages from beyond. and yet the tiny, crackling speaker filled the silence of his home with a presence that felt undeniably aware. He forced himself to step closer to confront the absurdity of it. "Who are you?" His own voice sounded small, shaking. Static answered. Then, faintly, a new layer of sound emerged beneath the melody. A second voice. Not the one that had spoken before, but different, low, gravelly, broken, like it had been scraped across stone. "Remember us," it whispered. Mark's skin crawled. The words weren't meant for just anyone. They carried weight, an expectation, as if he should know what they meant. But he didn't. He'd never heard this voice before in his life. The music swelled again, drowning the whisper. The lullaby stretched longer, stranger. Its rhythm didn't follow human timing. Each note lingered too long, bent in impossible ways, before falling into silence again. And then something new. Behind the song, hidden in the static, came faint clicks. At first random, but gradually forming a pattern. A beat, a rhythm. Like typing. Mark's stomach dropped. His grandfather had worked as a Morse operator during the war. Mark remembered being a kid, sitting on his knee, learning how to spell his own name in dots and dashes. These clicks weren't random. They were Morse. Mark scrambled for his phone, fumbling with the flashlight, grabbing a pen and paper from his desk. His heart hammered in his chest as he wrote each sequence down, trying to keep up with the rapid clicking. Dot dot. Dash. Dusk dot dot. He translated, hand shaking. D-O-N. K-T-U-N-A-R-U-N-D. The final letter dragged on too long, the last dash bleeding into static until the whole transmission collapsed back in a hiss. Mark's pen dropped from his fingers. His head turned instinctively against the command he had just written toward the dark window at his side. For an instant, just an instant, he thought he saw movement reflected in the glass. Not his. Something behind him. He spun, pulse surging in his throat. Nothing. The room was empty. The only sound was the hiss of static, softer now, as though the radio was waiting. Mark forced himself to breathe, to think. His logical brain clung to explanations. Pirate broadcast, prank, his own fatigue warping things. He needed proof. Evidence. Something to confirm this wasn't just his mind playing tricks. He pulled out his phone again, switched to the camera, and started recording. The radio's glow painted the room in faint orange light as the hum began once more. The melody was quieter now, almost tender, but beneath it came the same broken whisper. "Don't forget." The camera trembled in Mark's hands. Then through the lens he saw it. Not in front of him, not in the room, but in the small screen of his phone. A figure, standing directly beside him. Mark froze, staring at the phone's trembling screen. The figure wasn't detailed, just a faint silhouette, darker than the shadows, standing where there should have been empty space. It wasn't moving, but it wasn't still either. Like static given form, its edges flickered in and out, sharp 1 second, blurry the next. His throat was dry. "No," he whispered, lowering the phone, swinging it toward the empty room. Nothing. Just his overturned chair, the table, the glow of the old radio. He raised the phone again. The figure was closer. A jolt of panic shot through him. He staggered backward, nearly dropping the phone, his eyes locked on the shifting mass that stood at his shoulder. He felt nothing in the air, no breath, no presence pressing against him. And yet his screen insisted something was there. The whisper returned. Not from the radio, from the phone. "Don't stop watching." The voice was faint, distorted, crackling with the same static hum. Mark's stomach twisted. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't interference. Whatever this was, it was using the devices around him. He wanted to throw the phone, smash the radio, anything to sever the connection. But some deeper instinct kept him frozen. If he broke the chain, would the figure vanish? Or would it move closer, unseen? The lullaby returned, louder now, straining the tiny speaker of the radio. The notes bent further, each one sliding like a groan of metal. Mark pressed his hands over his ears, but the sound seemed to sink past flesh and bone. He felt it behind his eyes, vibrating in his teeth. The pen and paper still lay on the table where he'd written the Morse message. His gaze darted to it. Proof. Evidence. Something tangible. He forced himself forward, snatching the paper. The ink was smudged from his sweaty hands, but the words were still clear. Don't turn around. He stared at the warning. The figure was behind him when it appeared. Always behind. Mark's chest tightened. He couldn't stay here. He couldn't sleep in this house, not with that thing flickering in and out of sight. He shoved his phone into his pocket, grabbed his keys, and snapped off the lamp. The radio, however, did not go silent. It kept playing, glowing faintly in the dark room like a watchful eye. As Mark pulled the door shut, he swore he heard the whisper again, faint through the wood. Remember us. The night air was cold, biting his skin as he stumbled toward his car. The neighborhood was quiet, too quiet. Usually, at this hour, he'd hear the distant hum of late-night traffic, the faint barking of dogs. Now there was nothing. He climbed into the car, slammed the door, and locked it. The silence pressed and heavy. He shoved the key into the ignition, but paused before starting it. The car radio blinked awake on its own. Static. Mark's heart lurched. He hadn't touched it. The dial glowed, tuning itself, spinning in rapid clicks until it landed on the same warped lullaby. The sound filled the car, closer, sharper. He slammed his hand against the power button. Nothing. He yanked the volume dial all the way down. The sound didn't fade. The screen of his phone lit up in his pocket. He fumbled it out with shaking hands. The camera app was open. He hadn't touched it. The figure stood in the back seat. Mark's scream caught in his throat. He spun around, hands flailing at empty space. Nothing. Just the faint smell of dust and old leather. He looked back at the phone. Closer now. It hadn't moved in reality, but in the screen, its shadow stretched forward, arm lifting as if reaching. Mark hurled the phone against the passenger door. The screen cracked, but it didn't go dark. The camera stayed on, frozen, the figure's hand still outstretched. The radio in the dash hissed louder, almost deafening now, and the whisper returned. Don't leave. Mark's shaking hand turned the key. The engine roared to life, headlights flooding the empty street. He didn't wait. He slammed his foot on the gas, tires screeching as the car tore down the block. The lullaby followed him, clinging to the speakers no matter how far he drove. He didn't know how long he drove. Maybe minutes, maybe an hour. The streets blurred together, darkened houses rolling past like a repeating loop. The music never stopped. Finally, desperate, he swerved into the lot of a 24-hour diner, its neon sign flickering red against the empty parking spaces. The moment he turned off the car, the radio went silent. The stillness hit him like a wave. Mark sat, hands gripping the wheel, chest heaving. His cracked phone lay on the floor mat, screen dark now, mercifully still. He stumbled into the diner, the bell over the door jingling weakly. The place was nearly empty, just a tired waitress refilling coffee for a lone trucker at the counter. Mark slid into a booth near the back, pressing his palms into the cool surface of the table, trying to ground himself. For a moment, it worked. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and frying bacon. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. Normal. Safe. The waitress appeared, notepad in hand. Long night. Mark forced a shaky laugh. Something like that. Just coffee. Please. She nodded, moving off. Mark's hand still trembled, but slowly the panic ebbed. Maybe he was losing it. Maybe stress, lack of sleep, too much work, his brain weaving tricks from static and shadows. He'd recorded proof, but even that could be explained away as glitches, distortions. The waitress returned, setting the steaming cup in front of him. Anything else? No, thanks. He reached for the cup, grateful for the heat against his palms. Then he heard it, faint, under the hum of the lights. Static. He froze, eyes darting around the diner. The trucker's radio at the counter crackled softly. Mark's breath caught. The man didn't react, just kept sipping his coffee. But the sound grew louder, spilling out into the diner. The lullaby began again. Mark's skin prickled. His gaze shot to the trucker, but the man wasn't moving. His coffee cup hovered halfway to his mouth. His eyes were fixed forward, unblinking, as though he were frozen in place. The waitress stood at the counter, perfectly still. Mark's chest tightened. The whole diner was silent now, save for the radio's song. He looked down at his coffee cup. Ripples formed in the liquid. The reflection wasn't his. Mark's hand shook above the coffee cup. The liquid rippled softly, distorting the reflection of the face staring back at him. It wasn't his face. The skin was pale, grayish, almost translucent. The eyes were sunken, black rings circling them like hollow bruises. And the mouth was moving. The reflection's lips were whispering. Mark snatched his hand back. The cup stilled instantly, surface flat. His reflection was normal again. His own face. But the silence around him pressed heavy. Too heavy. The trucker at the counter hadn't moved an inch. His arm was still frozen midair, coffee cup just below his lips. The waitress stood behind him, her hand hovering inches from the coffee pot, like she'd been caught in mid-pour. Every tick of the overhead clock had stopped. Mark's stomach turned cold. The static filled the silence again, seeping from the trucker's old radio. The lullaby followed, warped, jagged notes that pulled at his nerves like rusted wire. But this time, beneath the lullaby, there were voices. Soft, layered, whispering. We remember you. Always behind. Don't look away. Mark stumbled to his feet, the scrape of the booth seat deafening against the dead air. He half expected the frozen figures to turn their heads in unison, to watch him. They didn't move. He backed toward the diner door, heart hammering. His eyes flicked to the trucker, still frozen. The waitress, motionless. The clock above the counter, still. Only the song moved. The bell above the door jingled as he pushed it open, stepping into the parking lot. The air outside was sharp, cold against his skin. But the world was no different. Every car on the street was stopped, headlights frozen in beams. A man in the distance stood mid-step, his scarf dangling motionless in the wind. Mark's throat tightened. The entire town was paused like a still frame, and he was the only one moving through it. The static swelled behind him. He turned. The diner windows glowed faintly, not from fluorescent light, from the radio. The silhouette stood inside, closer. It wasn't the faint blur from his phone this time. He could see it more clearly now, a tall, thin figure, its shape shifting in and out of focus like it was stitched together from shadows and static. No eyes, no features, just the impression of a body that didn't belong. And it was watching him. The diner bell jingled again. No one had touched it. Mark stumbled backward into the lot. His car sat where he'd left it, but the headlights were dead now, no sign of life. The lullaby seeped from the cracked diner door, louder than before. It followed him like a leash. Don't leave, the voices hissed. Stay with us. Mark's chest tightened. He turned and ran. The streets were endless. Every house he passed was frozen, curtains half drawn, cars paused at intersections, a dog mid-leap on a front lawn, teeth bared in a bark that never came. He ran until his lungs burned, but the lullaby followed, threading through the silence. Finally, gasping, he stumbled to a stop in front of a streetlight. It was the only thing moving. The bulb flickered, sputtering in irregular bursts. Each flash lit the pavement beneath it, shadows stretching and curling with each stutter. Mark's breath hitched, because in every flicker, the shadow of the figure appeared. Closer. One flash, empty street. Next flash, figure 10 feet closer. Next flash, 5 feet. Next flash, Mark screamed and bolted into the nearest alley, heart pounding, chest aching. His feet slapped against the pavement, echoes chasing him. He didn't look back. Couldn't. He tripped, crashing into a pile of old crates. Pain shot through his arm as he scrambled to his feet, pressing his back against the wall. For a moment, silence. The lullaby stopped. Mark's ragged breathing filled the air. His ears rang with the absence of sound. Then, click, a radio hissed to life nearby. Mark's head jerked toward the source. At the far end of the alley sat an old transistor radio, rusted, covered in grime, but glowing faintly. The same warped song bled from its speaker. It hadn't been there before. His blood ran cold. The whispers returned, weaving through the lullaby. He's watching now. He remembers you. Don't turn around. Mark's vision swam. He stumbled forward, unable to stop himself, drawn toward the static hum. Each step felt heavier, like the air itself resisted him. When he reached the radio, His reflection stared back at him from the cracked metal surface. But it wasn't alone. The figure stood behind him, not in the reflection, in the alley. Mark's scream tore from his throat as he spun. Nothing. Empty. The lullaby stopped. He stood alone in the alley, chest heaving, the radio dead and silent at his feet. For a moment, he thought it was over, until he noticed the wall. Words scrawled in jagged black ink across the bricks, fresh and dripping. We are already in the recording. The words burned in his mind as he stumbled back onto the street. The world was still frozen. Cars paused, people mid-stride, time at a standstill. But Mark couldn't stop staring at the phrase. Already in the recording. He thought of the songs, the voices, the messages in Morse. They weren't warning him. They were telling him what had already happened. His breath hitched. His childhood videos, the lullabies, the whispers, the figure in the camera. They had always been there. And now, he was part of it. He reached for his pocket out of instinct, forgetting he'd thrown his phone. His fingers brushed emptiness. But then, a faint vibration against his thigh. Mark froze. Slowly, he reached into his pocket again. His phone was there, unbroken, screen glowing. The camera app was open. He lifted it with trembling hands. The figure filled the frame, closer than ever. It whispered through the speaker, its voice a chorus of layered static. "Welcome back." Mark's scream lodged in his throat. He dropped the phone, but it didn't hit the ground. It floated midair, screen still glowing, the figure still smiling through static. The glow around the phone pulsed like a heartbeat. 1, 2, 3. Then everything around Mark shattered. The buildings dissolved like sand. The pavement cracked and melted beneath his feet. The frozen cars, the paused people, all broke apart into pixels of light and static. Mark fell, not downward, but inward. When he opened his eyes, the world had changed. He stood on a vast plain of black glass. Above him, no sky, only a swirling ocean of static. White noise thundered from every direction, vibrating in his bones. The air was thick, heavy, and alive. It pressed in on him as though watching, waiting. Mark turned slowly, heart pounding. In the distance, figures stood in a circle. Tall, thin, faceless. Each one shifted like bad reception, their forms glitching in and out of existence. They didn't move, not in the usual sense, but they repositioned, each time Mark blinked closer, tighter in their circle. At the center of them, a radio, rusty, small, and glowing with the same pulsing light as his phone. The lullaby bled from it, warped beyond recognition, notes bent and twisted. Underneath, dozens of voices whispered in unison. "You're one of us now, part of the recording, play it back again and again." Mark staggered backward. His foot struck something solid. He turned. It was himself, his own reflection standing behind him. But it didn't mirror him. It stared directly into his eyes, then reached up and tore its own face open, revealing nothing beneath but static. Mark screamed. The figures closed in. One of them extended a hand, long and skeletal. From its palm, a reel-to-reel tape recorder emerged, floating in the air. It began to play, but not music. It played Mark's voice. "I don't know what's happening. I think I'm losing my mind. Please, someone help me." Each sentence layered atop the other until the sound became a storm of his own words. Mark clutched his head. His skull throbbed with the force of it. The static ocean above churned violently, lightning-like flashes tearing through it, each one illuminating new faces. Familiar ones. The trucker, the waitress, the people in the frozen town, all staring, all silent. And then one more face. His mother. She stepped forward from the static. Her face was kind, familiar, but her eyes were hollow, mouth moving with someone else's words. "We've been waiting, Mark," she whispered. "You were always meant to return." The radio flared. The lullaby ended, and in its place, a new song began. Soft, familiar. His song, the one he hummed as a child, the one he'd forgotten, until now. Recorded, the voices whispered. Preserved, forever and ever and ever. The black glass beneath him cracked. Mark's reflection screamed. He woke up on the floor of his apartment, heart racing, clothes soaked in sweat. The lights flickered above him. He scrambled to his feet, stumbling toward the window. The city outside looked normal. Cars moving, people walking, time flowing. But his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and froze. The screen showed the view from his front door camera. A man stood there, tall, thin, featureless. Mark dropped the phone. It didn't shatter. It laughed, a soft, static-filled chuckle that echoed through the apartment. Then silence. Mark turned slowly. The radio sat on his kitchen counter. The same one, rusty, glowing. It played his song. Hours passed, or seconds. Time had no meaning anymore. Mark sat in the corner, eyes locked on the radio. It hadn't moved, but the song had changed again. Now it was broadcasting voices. Hundreds of them, each one speaking in unison. Recording complete, subject integrated, archive updated. A green light blinked on the radio. Then a printer in the corner, one Mark didn't own, spat out a sheet of paper. He stared at it. It read, "Welcome to the archive, Mark Reynolds. You will be remembered." The paper caught fire. No flame, just a soft hiss like static. Mark stood slowly. His reflection in the darkened TV screen smiled at him and whispered, "Play it again." Mark didn't sleep that night. He sat in the corner of his apartment, knees to his chest, staring at the radio glowing faintly on the counter. Its dial spun slowly back and forth, though no one touched it. Each time the needle stopped, another voice emerged. Some were weeping, others begged, some prayed, some sang, and all of them spoke as though they knew him. "Mark, you're late. Mark, remember the tape? It's waiting. Mark, don't try to leave again." He clutched his head, whispering to himself, "This isn't real. This isn't real." But the apartment around him began to ripple, like paint running down a wall. The furniture warped, sagging into shadow. His clock spun wildly, hands whirring until it stopped, not on a number but on static. The walls dissolved, and Mark was elsewhere. He stood in a long hallway, its walls lined with radios. Hundreds, thousands. Each one crackled, tuned to a different frequency, a different voice, a different scream. The air was thick with white noise, yet in the distance, one melody rang clear. A piano, haunting, slow, drawn by something he couldn't name. Mark walked. Each radio he passed flickered with images, not just sound, but moving pictures across their cracked glass. He saw the trucker staring into his coffee, the waitress cleaning the same table over and over, the frozen town looping endlessly in a moment that never advanced. Each image shifted, becoming distorted, but every single one of them ended the same way, with a tall, faceless figure turning toward the screen and staring back at him. Mark walked faster. The hallway ended at a door. Rusty, heavy. On its surface, words burned faintly. Archive room. He pushed it open. Inside was a vast chamber, walls stacked with shelves that rose into darkness. On each shelf, rows of reel-to-reel tapes spun silently. Thousands upon thousands of them, labeled with names. Mark scanned the nearest row. Jane Wilcox, integrated. David Ashkol archived. Mia Vargas preserved. His heart stopped when he reached the next. Mark Reynolds, recording in progress. The tape spun slowly, and from it came his own voice. "I'm standing in a room full of tapes. I don't think I'll ever get out. Please, if someone finds this, don't listen to the music." He stumbled backward. The shelves shook. From the shadows above, something stirred. A figure descended. Not one of the faceless watchers, but something else entirely. Its body was static given shape, its outline flickering, shifting. Its head was a television, screen glowing faintly with endless symbols. It spoke in many voices at once. "The archive is eternal. Memory must be preserved. Songs are not written. They are remembered." Mark's throat tightened. "Why me? Why are you doing this to me?" The static being tilted its head, screen flashing his childhood image. Him, as a boy, humming the lullaby. "You began the song. You opened the frequency. You were always ours." The floor cracked open. Below, black glass stretched forever, reflecting Mark's face. Dozens, hundreds of reflections, each one slightly different. Some of them begged. Some screamed. Some smiled. Integration complete, the voices whispered. Mark ran. He bolted down rows of shelves, past endless tapes, endless names. But no matter how far he ran, the room stretched longer. The shelves bent, curving back into themselves, forming a circle. He stopped, chest heaving, and there was again the radio, waiting for him on a pedestal. Its glow pulsed, syncing with his heartbeat. The melody changed. Now it was no longer just notes. It was his voice singing the lullaby. And beneath it, the chorus of thousands joined in. "Play it again, Mark. Play it again." Forever, he fell to his knees. Tears blurred his vision. He wanted to fight, to resist, to scream. But the music filled his skull, vibrating through his bones, wrapping around his thoughts. The static being loomed over him. Once recorded, never forgotten, it reached down and pressed its hand against his chest. Mark gasped. His vision split, fracturing into countless copies of himself. Every memory he had, every second of his life, spinning off into new recordings. He saw himself at age 7, humming in his room. At 16, laughing with friends. At 22, staring into his reflection too long. Each moment was taped, preserved, filed. He was no longer a person. He was a recording. When Mark woke again, he was standing behind the counter of a gas station. The bell jingled. A traveler walked in. Tired, lonely, curious. Mark smiled at them. Behind his teeth, static buzzed. "Can I help you find something?" he asked. On the shelf beside him, an old radio crackled to life and began to play a brand new song. A song no one had ever written.